All right, y'all. We'll go ahead and start. So, I noticed, or several of y'all have noticed that I was absent for a bit. And so I kind of just want to tell y'all about why I was not here the last couple of weeks. So it's been 3 weeks since I've seen y'all, and I've missed you, so I'm very happy today. But 3 weeks ago, I missed because I was presenting at a conference here on campus for grad students to talk about their research. And then the week after that, I was supposed to go talk about a different part of my research, but I was sick, so I didn't get the chance to. But I'll talk about it with y'all. So as you can see up here, resilience and stuff. All of my research for my master's degree and just the things that I do for school are about resilience. So I'll tell you about what I know about resilience. I'll tell you what I think about resilience, and then we'll have a brief conversation about who I think. But what is resilience? It's kind of a weird term, but it's familiar to us all. We all have some sort of idea of what it is, but the concrete definition is kind of vague. But it's defined as the human ability to bounce back and after difficult life experiences. And the reason why I say human ability is because there's definitions of it in terms of like materials, like resilience of a plank of wood. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the human ability to bounce back after adversity. Things about resilience that you should know. It's a process, which means it takes time. It's not this flip of a switch. It develops over a period of time. It's dynamic, which means it's weird. It's not this rigid, formulaic thing that just happens like this, one step after the other. It flows and it changes and it has ups and it has downs and it takes time. And then lastly, it's personal and specific. So it kind of depends on who you are and kind of depends on what you're going through. So again, resilience is the ability to bounce back after difficult life experiences. So I study communication and I look at resilience and communication. And there's a very specific theory that grounds all of my work. All of it is based off the communication theory of resilience offered by Buzanel in 2010. She has that same definition where it's the ability to bounce back after difficult life experiences. But she was looking at the communication of it. So what she did was interview communities that were going through hardships, such as natural disasters or economic downturn. And she was asking them about how they were talking to each other and how they were talking about their problems. And what she found is that there's a series of communication processes that take place during the development of resilience. And these are what these processes are. And I'll give you a brief kind of explanation of what each one is, and then I'll give you a more targeted one when I get into my own experiences with it. So first, crafting normalcy. When we go through adversity, life changes. And now we've got to start talking about it in a way in which it seems normal. We normalize it, all right? Just kind of imagine a doctor told you that you have cancer. You have to acknowledge this. If you never acknowledge and create a new normal out of having cancer, then it's going to make it very hard for you to bounce back from that if you've never acknowledged it. So you've got to start talking about it in a way to where it seems normal. That's one of the processes. The next one is affirming identity anchors. It's pretty similar. When we go through adversity, we go through some changes. And now we've got to start talking about ourselves in relation to our strengths. So identity anchors are clusters of character strengths that have endured over time. So it's your strengths that you have seen pretty much throughout your whole life. All right? So when you go through adversity to develop resilience, now you've got to start talking about these things. You've got to emphasize it when you talk about yourself. And that helps your development of resilience. The next one is maintaining communication networks. We all know this. When we go through stuff, we've got to talk to people. All right? And that's what that process is. The ways that you talk to them, who you talk to, and how you talk about it, that matters. The next one is putting alternative logics to work. So like I said, you go through adversity, things change, and you've got to start doing things differently. You've got cancer. You can't keep doing the same things. You've got to go through chemo, all right? But the ways that you talk about what you're doing different or what you're doing differently, well, that matters, all right? It helps facilitate it. You can use a negative perspective or a positive perspective, and that's going to have a very specific influence on your process of resilience. And then the last one is reframing, all right? So in this process, you acknowledge your legitimate right to feel bad about the situation, but then you choose productive action, all right? And it's best summed up with 6 words. This sucks, but I got this, all right? So you acknowledge that this is a shitty situation, but then you choose to move forward. You choose that productive action, all right? So these are the communication processes that are taking place during the development of resilience. When people are going through adversity, they start talking about themselves, their challenges, their resources, and their path forward in very specific ways, and these are them. So here's what I know about resilience, all right? I put this theory to the test. So, and the way that I tested it is called it's a project called Purposeful Processes of Resilience, Strategizing Resilience Through Communication. So, like I said, I tested it on myself. In 2017, on May 1st, I had a somewhat traumatic mental breakdown that was caused by my eating disorders that I'd been struggling with since 2012. I developed anorexia and body dysmorphia, really struggled with it for the next several years, and then at the beginning of 2017, it kind of became like very problematic and affecting my ability to function every day. I'd been studying this resilience stuff for about 4 or 5 months at that time, and when I finally came down from that mental breakdown, oh man, that was rough. I need some resilience. So I say, how can I do this? And so I start thinking about a plan to where I can purposefully apply those communication processes of resilience to my life to see if it will actually work. You know, the question was, can I strategically develop resilience by doing these processes on purpose, which is why it's called Purposeful Processes of Resilience. So I'll tell you about that. I'll tell you the purposeful ones, the processes and how I decided to do them on purpose, but I'll also briefly tell you about the ones that just popped up on their own. So first one, crafting normalcy. You know, when I realized I needed resilience, I realized I had no idea how I'd even gotten to this point. You know, how did I get to this where I'm so mean to myself about my body and I'm restricting my diet? How did I get here? So I decided I'm going to journal absolutely everything for an entire week, and then we'll just go from there. So I'm journaling like crazy, journaling, and that's how I kind of figured out where I was and where I needed to go. That's how I crafted normalcy. But then for the rest of the project, I actually decided to journal the entire thing. And so I was journaling everything every day for 6 months, and I ended up with tons and tons of journal entries, and those were used to analyze the changes and all that kind of stuff. So that was the purposeful idea. I'm going to journal everything to figure out how I got here, who I am, and all this kind of stuff. But the one that popped up without me realizing was drawing. I've been drawing as just a hobby for about 5 years, but I noticed that towards the last couple of months of that project that I was starting to draw how I felt. I was starting to draw a lot of things that I saw beauty in. I was also starting to draw some of my challenges with food. And so there was this process of communicating by drawing what I was feeling, and that's how I was normalizing it for myself. The next one, affirming identity anchors. The one that I chose to affirm on purpose was that of a student. Because before all this happened, that was where I felt most resilient. At one time I was on academic probation, and then I get my grades up to high enough to get into grad school, so I felt resilient as that. So I just kept affirming myself as a student. And what I mean by that is I was accepting that it's okay to be wrong. You know, when you're a student, you're supposed to be wrong. You're supposed to learn. And so by affirming myself, you know, you're a student, and just not a student in school in this matter. In this matter, I'm a student of food. I need to learn what I like, but is also healthy, what makes me feel good, and what doesn't make me bully myself. So I was trying to learn as much about myself as I could by affirming my identity as a student. But the one that popped up was basketball coach. I didn't intend on coaching myself, but then doing my analysis of my journal entries, I'm seeing all these very motivating and encouraging phrases of how I'm speaking to myself, and that was new. And so there was this identity of a basketball coach that I've been for 10 years that just kind of popped up without me expecting it. And so I kept encouraging, coaching, and mentoring myself rather than bullying. The next one was maintain communication networks. Well, at the time, I'd never told anybody before in my life. I'd told not a single person about these problems. So I'm like, all right, well, first things first, I'll tell my best friend. So I develop a plan on how to tell them. I tell them, and then I tell another person, and then I tell another person. And then after I've told that third person, I finally was like, all right, I'm ready to go see a therapist about this. And that was the emergent one. That was the one that popped up that I didn't plan on. The one that was on purpose, I'm just going to tell my best friend, and we'll go from there. But then I got comfortable talking about it, and then I was like, all right, well, maybe I should go see a professional, and this might help. And it did. It was probably one of the better decisions I've made in my life in general. But that was one of those processes that just popped up on its own. The next one, alternative logic. Things change. You've got to do things differently in the face of adversity to get through it. So during that initial week of journaling, I've noticed that every time I see myself, whether it's a picture, reflection, anything like that, I call myself a fat piece of shit. That's what FPOS stands for. It's pretty brutal. And so I realized that's something I really need to change. And so my alternative logic is that when I notice myself calling myself that, I'm going to change it and just say the initials, FPOS. And that's how I'm going to start tone back the bullying, the self-bullying. Instead of just stopping it cold turkey, I'll just do it a little bit less. And that purposeful act made it a lot easier to be more caring and supportive towards myself. But the next alternative logic that just popped up on its own that I never expected was vegetarianism. I changed the way that I was speaking to myself, but of course I changed my diet because all this problem came from my diet. And out of nowhere, I realized after about a month, I've actually just been a vegetarian for the last month, and I had no plans on it. And then I just committed to it, and that's how it's been ever since then. So that's one of the alternative logics that just kind of emerged on its own. And then the last one is the reframing. Y'all know I've been a basketball coach for a long time. As a basketball player and coach, you see so many sprained ankles. It's really not that bad of an injury. As long as you take care of it and do some specific stuff for a couple of weeks, you'll be fine. You'll bounce back. But at the time, my eating disorder felt like it was hopeless and it was permanent. And that was making it really hard to get through it. So I decided to stop characterizing it that way as something hopeless and permanent. And I decided to describe it as a brain sprain. I've just done something wrong. I've done a weird movement. I've sprained my brain. And if I do some specific things, I'll be all right. And so that's what I started doing. And then as I start moving through this process, a new reframing emerged of the Higgs rig. And this is my favorite one. My dad was a mechanic, and he taught me and my brother how to fix things. Sometimes when we'd fix it, we wouldn't actually fix the problem. We would just rig it so that we could keep using it. But then the rig would break, and we'd have to rig that, and we just keep rigging it till the whole thing breaks. And then we got to go see a professional to actually get it working again. And I realized that's what I did with my diet. I just kept rigging it until it just fell apart completely. And so this reframing of the situation took it away from this permanent, hopeless matter into just this classic, hilarious take that's related to me and my dad that just makes it feel a lot less detrimental and traumatic, honestly. And so those are just some of the examples. That's how I purposefully started developing my resilience by changing the way I was talking about myself, my challenges, my resources, and my path forward. But then also these emergent ones just came up. And so I did this for 6 months. I journaled it all, and then I went back in and started doing an analysis to see if it actually worked. And it did. My eating disorders just disappeared. They were gone. And then my overall well-being, my life satisfaction became the highest it ever was. It's like, okay, there's something to this. The question was, can resilience be strategically developed? The answer, at least for me in that situation, was yes. And so what I did is I wrote a paper about it. Turned it in for my class, got really great feedback from my professor, and she said to keep going with it. Submit this to conferences, try to present it. And so I did. I submitted to a couple conferences, it got accepted, and so I'm trying to figure out, what exactly have I learned from this? Well, the original question, can resilience be strategically developed? Yes. But I also learned a couple other things about resilience. One is that it's contextual. It's based on the adversity that you're experiencing. So in the original research from Bouzino, where she's looking at these communities, she's looking at community problems, and what she found is that the communication that mattered was community communication, how they were talking to each other. But my problem was very personal, and what mattered for my resilience was my intrapersonal communication, how I was speaking to myself. So it's this idea that, yes, you can develop resilience strategically, but you've got to focus on the context of the adversity. There's not just this generic formula that will apply to everything. It's specific based on what you're going through. But it's also cultural. It's very dependent on your cultural identities. For me, as an example, as a student, it's part of academic culture that students don't know crap and you're there to learn. And just kind of accepting that and reinforcing that just gave me a better footing to develop my own resilience. It's about learning. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be without this knowledge. But I also banked on my cultural identity as a basketball coach. I went from being bullying to being supportive and caring, but also being somewhat competitive with it. How can I eat more healthy food? How can I do a little bit more yoga? How can I hang out with a little bit more friends right now? And so that piece of that athletic culture that I identified with really mattered. But if you go back and look at the research and look at how families were communicating with each other, specifically military families, there were very specific cultural communication practices involved with that. And so it's this idea that, yes, resilience can be strategically developed, but you've got to factor in the context of the adversity, but also the culture of those that are experiencing it. And so this idea of culture is what we transition to the next piece of this, which is what I think about resilience. Now, the reason why I say what I think is because these are all very new things. These are recent revelations I've had in the past 2 months. This is all related to my thesis. Purposeful processes is something separate from my master's degree. It's just something that happened on its own that I'm continuing with. But my thesis is kind of how I got into resilience studies to begin with. And what brought me there is my experiences as a basketball coach. Every single basketball player that I've ever met will tell you that basketball helped them get through hard times. And that's what I wanted to know about. So that's how I started researching this stuff. But our department is intercultural communication. So we look at how cultures influence communication. And when I say culture, I mean it's a system of symbols, meanings, and behaviors. So essentially your culture is what influences the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, and the way you interact with the other people, the other members of your group. And my thesis is grounded by the ethnography of communication, which says that culture and communication are intertwined. Your culture influences the way you communicate influences your culture. Now, me as a basketball coach, I am wholly aware that basketball has its own culture. And so I'm wondering, okay, if the ways we talk about resilience matters, and if our culture influences resilience, and basketball culture is developing resilience for basketball players, what kind of communication is happening there? And so that's what my master's degree is. It's looking at what about basketball culture is helping hoopers get through the hard times. So what I'm doing for that is I'm interviewing professional basketball players about their experiences with adversity and with resilience. The study is in progress, like I said, which is why I say I think these things. I don't know them for sure, but I want to tell you about some of the interesting things I found. I've interviewed 14 professional basketball players and coaches, and one thing that is very prevalent in all of these interviews is there's a conversation taking place about how important it is to just get into the gym and shoot, just getting shots up. You're not actually playing the game. You're just in there working on your game by yourself. And this is like a very important process for all hoopers. And so they're saying that this is what helped them with their own resilience. Okay, I get that. I really do. But I had this revelation that made me realize that it's much bigger than just basketball. And it came from another personal experience with resilience that is separate from the other one. So this summer, my father passed away. And truth be told, it destroyed me. And for the first 2 weeks, I genuinely just could not get off of my floor. 2 weeks after that, I'm up, kind of working on school stuff again, but not really. 6 weeks after that, I'm kind of full on into my thesis, but everything else is off to the side. And I'm going through these, and I'm seeing all these hoopers talk about how basketball has helped them through hard times. And I realized my own resilience is there, because 4 weeks before that, I could not get off the floor. So I asked myself, what's the difference? Because I haven't touched a basketball. Where has my resilience come from if I haven't hooped? And it hits me, drawing. Because even that first 2 weeks after he passed, I'm stuck on the floor. I'm still sitting on the floor drawing. Drawing is the one thing I've been able to do. So it hits me. It's not basketball, it's passion. And the reason why basketball matters for these professional players, well, it's because basketball is their passion. And so this act of participating in your passion, that's what matters. And just with my thesis, it's just coincidental that it's basketball. But I have to ask myself, well, what about passion? How is just having a passion getting through things? So I go back into the data, I go back into the interviews, and I'm digging around more and more and more and more and more. And I find another interesting thing coming from pretty much all of the participants, all of their responses, is that they're talking about basketball like it's a relationship. And I want you to kind of think about your own passions in your life. It feels like a relationship. It feels like you have something with it. And so in my undergrad, I'm studying interpersonal communication, the role of communication within relationships. And so I'm asking myself, well, if you have a relationship with the sport, well, does that mean that you can communicate with it? Well, my idea is yes. So if you have a relationship with passion, you communicate with it. Well, when are you communicating with it? When you're participating in it. And so that act of going into the gym and shooting, that's them communicating with their passion. And it creates this relationship where you're kind of judgment-free. Because that's the hard part about sharing personal things with people, is that idea of judgment. What are they going to think? What are they going to say? But when you can turn to your passion, this relationship, this opportunity to communicate with yourself without that judgment, it gives you an opportunity to take advantage of those communication processes of resilience. Because now you have this judgment-free place to do those communication processes where you can craft normalcy. You can figure out what the hell is going on in your life. You can affirm your identity anchors. You're a good hooper. You just drilled 10 threes in a row. Your confidence has come up a little bit. That matters in the face of adversity. And so it's this idea that, yes, our passions help us through, but why? Because it creates this positive relationship that we have with something other than just another human being that may judge us or might not. So I'm going through these interviews some more, and I find one more piece that just I can't let go of. And so after I'd made this realization between passion and resilience, I had 3 more interviews to do still. And in those 3 interviews, I'm asking them, what do you think about the connection between passion and resilience? And this one coach says something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. He says, passion is what fuels the return. It's like, oh, okay. So I'm thinking about this for days and days and days. Like, it makes sense, but I don't understand why. Well, because when we go through adversity, it's like getting knocked out. The more traumatic the adversity is, the more areas of life that you get knocked out of. So you just go through a breakup. You can still function. You go to work. You go hang out with your boys. You can hang out with your dog, and you're okay. But in your personal realm, it's pretty challenging. And it takes time to get back into that, to be comfortable getting into a relationship again. Me personally, when I lost my father, that knocked me out of everything except for art. So my passion for drawing gave me the fuel to return to drawing, which set the template on how to get back into everything else. So it's a matter of getting knocked out of these things and then slowly adding them back into your life as you go. That's this dynamic, long process of resilience. And your passion is what fuels that. It's that first step. It gives you that confidence. It lets you reaffirm your identity anchors, your strengths, and it gives you a chance to kind of craft normalcy, to understand what the changes were. So it's a lot of stuff. I know I've gone through a few things, and like I said, it's a lot of stuff, but I kind of just, oh man, I went out of order. I was going to do a recap, but I want to do this one first. So who I thank. You guys are really awesome. I genuinely mean that. Thanksgiving was pretty tough. I'll just be honest with you. But I was so excited to see y'all again. I was looking forward to it because it's something that I have passion for, teaching and being around y'all. And so it gave me this fuel of return. So now let's jump into this recap. Really what this presentation is about is something that you already have known. That the ways that you talk about yourself and your life, it actually matters. It really does. It's something that you know. But what these projects are, is basically an academic exploration of why. Why does it matter? What is happening when you're talking to yourself in specific ways? What is happening when you talk to people in specific ways, specifically in the realm of resilience? But then also, too, the other thing that this presentation is about is that your passions matter. Whether or not it's a big thing or a small thing. Drawing's not my career. Drawing is not going to be my career. It's just something that I love. I would do it regardless. It's a small thing. But those things that give you juice, that give you a little bit of pep in your step, that are easy to do, that don't bring your soul down when you do them, those things matter. Just like the ways that you speak to yourselves. They're very connected to resilience and your ability to cope with traumatic things, but also just the everyday stresses. And then lastly, I just want y'all to know that you rock. I think you're an amazing group of students. I really do appreciate y'all giving me this chance to kind of talk this out because, like I said, some of this is really new. This is the first time I've done both of these presentations together. It's actually the first time I've done the second presentation about passion. So if it's confusing, I understand because I'm still a little confused about it by myself. But if you have any comments, questions, we have 10 minutes for questions right now. But if you don't want to ask your question or don't want to give your comment, feel free to email me. You can ask any question you want. I know I've touched on a couple of personal things. Totally fine. I'm ready to talk about them. So if you want to ask questions, feel free. But right now, we have 10 minutes if anybody has questions or comments.
You rule, Matt. Start work.
Have you ever tried to analyze a past experience and use the same process to get through something like without realizing it? If that makes sense, how I wrote that.
So I have a pretty cool example from when I went to Budapest this summer. I was there for my presentation of this purposeful process stuff, and I didn't realize it till later that day. But the day of my presentation, I know I'm presenting at 1. I'm staying my Airbnb is a 2-hour walk from the campus, and the reason why I know this is because I love walking everywhere, so I was just walking back and forth the whole time. But it was raining like crazy. And so I'm freaking out. I can't get a taxi because the language barrier was a beast. I was on the phone for like an hour just trying to tell her what street I was on, and she finally got mad and hung up. Couldn't get a taxi, couldn't get an Uber, didn't know how to get there on the bus. I'm freaking out, running out of time. And finally this idea hits me like, you know what, man? You love the rain. You love walking in the rain. You have an umbrella right here. You know that there's taxis at the train station, which is an hour away. So crank out the umbrella, walk to the train station, and we'll go from there. And so I do that, and it was one of the most lovely walks of my life. Rainy Budapest is beautiful. I get to the train station. There's a taxi right there. It takes me out. I get there, no problems. But then looking back on it, I'm seeing where these processes are taking place. I had to objectively describe what the situation was. I had to craft a normalcy. It's raining, whatever. I'm here. I love the rain. I love walking. I have an opportunity to affirm my own identity strengths of being outside and loving it. I have an alternative logic. Instead of taking a taxi from here straight there, I can do it a little bit differently. Maintain a communication network. Well, I was asking my Airbnb host, and she's giving me all these ideas, and that's where I get my umbrella for. Reframing, instead of seeing it as like, this sucks, I'm stuck at the Airbnb, I'll never get to do my presentation, reframed it into, actually, this is pretty cool. I get to walk in the rain before I go give a presentation. This is amazing. And so that's an example that I really like. And when I went through it at the time, I wasn't thinking like, apply this resilience stuff to right now. But then afterwards, I was like, oh shit, this actually works in like everyday challenging situations as well as big picture stuff. Thank you. This is a good question.
And who can say that? You.
Sure.
What?
Gabby?
So, do you think that we like naturally retrain our brains to think about resilience? Like, do you think that those processes happen naturally after you've done them, or do you think you have to like retrain your brain like you did?
I think so, because the brain kind of works like the body. And that was one of the things that I was trying to go through when I realized that I had developed this habit of calling myself a fat piece of crap. When I was coaching basketball, you see kids that will have bad mechanics. Like they go to shoot, you're supposed to keep your left hand straight, and they'll turn their left hand. That's bad mechanics. But if you just are deliberate about it for a couple of months, you'll break that habit. You'll keep your shooting hand straight, and you won't even have to think about it. So I'm like, okay, well, what if the brain is the same way, where it just gets into these habits, and then we don't even realize they're happening? But if we're purposeful about it, can we change it? And so I started doing very purposeful things, trying to pay attention to the bad habits that my brain was and reinforce these good ones. And once the good habits get reinforced, then they become a lot easier. But I also don't think that it ever becomes natural. I think it's something that takes continual effort because, like I said, resilience is contextual. It's based on the problem you're facing. So what got you through one problem might not get you through the next one. And so I think what is most important in the process is training yourself to be mindful. Not really training yourself to be resilient, but training yourself to pay attention to what you're thinking. And that's really the most important step. Anybody else? Did you? No.
I'm guilty of that all the time. I'll call myself a tard.
Yeah. I heard you.
No, dude.
You did it like an hour ago. But it's weird. Like, we just do these strange things, and we get so used to it because we don't actually mean it. Like, sometimes we're like, oh, you fucking idiot. Why did you do that? Thinking that to yourself, you don't actually think that you're an idiot, but you get into these habits, and when you're faced with challenges, these habits matter. They may hurt you. They may help you. And that's why you have to pay attention to those things. Anybody else? Amazing. Yeah.
So, in your journaling, could you see a difference from the beginning to like the end once?
I like that question. So I did, y'all know what word clouds are? So you take a document, run it through word cloud software, and it'll tell you the words that are in that document the most. So I did word clouds. So like I said, I journaled for 6 months. I did a word cloud of the whole thing, and I did a word cloud of each individual month. Month 1, month 2, month 3. And then I've looked at month 1 versus month 6, and it's my favorite thing ever. Oh my God. So on month 1, smack dab in the middle, as big as can be, F word. Fuck. It's just huge. It's right there. That is the main word from the first month. The last month, 2 words. Love food. Holy shit. That blew my mind. Never in my life have I ever felt like I actually loved food because it was something, I had a weird relationship with food my whole life. And so I was looking at it, I was like, well, what is this indicative of? So that first month, the F word, and I'm looking at it, there's so much more cuss words on there than just the F word. And I'm like, oh, that's verbally aggressive. You know, I studied that in my undergrad, looking at verbally aggressive coaches and how detrimental it is to success. And a characteristic of verbally aggressive coaches is cussing like that. You know, I was calling myself an effing idiot all the time. But in that last one, it's all supportive stuff. And so there was this drastic change in my own intrapersonal culture surrounding food. I basically changed it from bullying into support and care. And so that change, I'll never forget when I put those 2 up. It was mind-blowing. I was glad that I did that. And thank you for that question. That's sweet. Yeah.
Do you still journal?
Not as much. I really only journal like the major things, and it's really mostly all with my research when I'm just like walking around and I have one of these realizations like, oh my God, it's bigger than basketball, it's a passion, and I'll journal that. I tried journaling a little bit right after my father died, and it just didn't feel right. I felt like I needed to do some other things. And so I kind of changed it up and was just actually talking about it. And so I feel like that's another example as to why resilience is specific based on what you're going through and how you feel at that time.
So you mentioned that you feel like resilience, and you feel like culture helps resilience, right? So what do you think about resilience against something in a culture that affects you negatively?
Do you have an example?
I'm trying to think.
Like bigotry that gets passed down culturally?
Like harassment in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean,
negative about it.
yeah, and so there's things that can have negative impacts on it. And what you have to do if you're trying to strategically develop resilience is you really need to do an in-depth assessment of the culture that's influencing that situation. And because every culture has its pluses and every culture has its negatives. And what your job is to find those pluses, the good things. Because 9 times out of 10, those are going to be related to the individual's character strengths. And so they're identity anchors. And so, you have to be able to acknowledge what is detrimental. And so it's also a process of crafting normalcy of where you're objectively trying to understand the situation for what it is. And then you've got to objectively understand what the culture and how it's influencing that situation and what its strengths are and what its weaknesses are. And you've got to take the strengths and just run with them. You have to use those. And like I said, it's a process that develops over time and it's dynamic. So what might work in month 1 might not work in month 2. And it might not work in month 3, but it might work again in month 4. You don't know. And so it's this constant process of reassessing how things are going and where you're at.
You sound pretty strong in statistics. Am I hearing that correctly?
Sure. Nice comment. You got time for one more?
So you listed out stages of like how resilience works, like how you reaffirm your identity and how you have to reframe. And I was wondering if like in, I guess not all situations since it's contextual, but like does it typically like happen in that order or can they kind of be moved around?
And so that's what I mean when I say that it's dynamic, is that there's not a sequence. It doesn't happen in this order. And there's also not a hierarchy. One of those processes is not more important than the other. And going back and looking at my journal entries, I'm seeing all of them just influencing each other. The ways that they all work together. And that's why it's a very interesting and dynamic process. That idea of the Higgs rig, we keep fixing it, but not really fixing it, and it keeps breaking down, and then we have to see a professional. That's what led me to go to see a therapist on top of maintaining my communication network. So those two right there helped me create an alternative logic of getting help. And seeing him created this new alternative logic of changing my diet, because he really helped me change my diet, which also helped me become a vegetarian, which has then become an identity anchor for me. And so there's this weird interplay of how they're always functioning together. And so it's, like you said, it's contextual. It really depends on what's happening at that time and where you're trying to go with it. But yeah, they're not hierarchical and they're not sequential. They just flow. They're just there interacting with each other and playing off each other and creating new processes.
Zero correlation.
Sure. Another good comment. But yeah, I really appreciate y'all's comments and feedback and questions. I appreciate your time and your attention. Like I said, if you have any other questions or comments, just toss me an email. I'd love to chat about it with you. I also won't be offended if you don't feel like you have to. But with that being said, that's all for me, and I do believe we're done.
That is it.
Yeah, so go ahead and boogie on over.
You're an absolute hero.